Hello, my fellow comrades of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic. I am Dmitry Valentinovich Epifanov, a party historian and most definitely not an American spy. We are here in the wilderness of Siberia to talk about our glorious motherland's history from the time period of 1500 to 1800. Though not as momentous as our own glorious revolution, it was a time of great change in our beloved nation. A time where the princes of Muscovy and the Tsars of the fallen empire would turn outward not only for expansion, but also for inane Western ideas. It would be expansion that drove this change, including attempted Westernization in the period of 1500 to 1800. Why would our people seek to claim this vast, seemingly empty land for their own? Come with me to find out why it is that expansion drove our nation until nearly a century before its inevitable collapse into our most perfect socialist state. Our great nation did not always lay claim to the amount of land it has now, comrades. Before there was such a thing as Russia, there was the Grand Duchy of Muscovy. Ruled by grand princes such as Ivan IV, this state was subservient to the Khanate of the Golden Horde. In the 15th century, the Mongols began to lose their grip, the Tatar yoke, on our great people. In 1480, Ivan III made the decision not to pay tribute to the Mongols. In response, the foreign oppressors from Asia attempted a failed attack on the great city of Moscow. With this newfound freedom, the masters of Moscow looked towards expansion. It was only natural that Ivan IV, crowned in 1547 as a Tsar, would proceed by taking the remaining Khanates in the area for their land. The Khanate of Kazan fell in 1552. In 1556, the Khanate of Astrakhan fell. By 1581, the Khanate of Siberia would be subdued. Arguably, the age of Russian imperial expansion to the east began with these conquests. While our glorious nation found success to the east, Western expansion by Ivan IV was limited. Following his conquest of Novgorod in 1478, he turned his attention toward the Baltic. Like most monarchs that would come to power in that age, Ivan the Terrible realized the importance of economic expansion and trade. It would be an understatement to say that the settlement of Archangel on the North Sea was inadequate, as its port was frozen for the majority of the year. So, in an attempt to gain access to the Baltic trade, and therefore its established trading cities via sea, the young ruler turned his gaze westward to Livonia. The resulting war, taking place from 1558 to 1583, would be a failure, with all captured land being returned to Sweden and the personal union of Poland and Lithuania. Despite this loss, the expansion that Ivan IV attempted into the west would characterize Russia's interactions with its neighbors. Territorial expansion would always be the key to economic improvement, greater trade opportunities, and increased access to resources that grew rarer in Central Europe. Ivan the Terrible's ambitions for control of a strong centralized state are thought to have originated from his surroundings as a child. Before he set out on his military campaigns, he had to endure 13 years of regency. His father, Grand Prince Vasily, died while the prince was only 3. Over the course of those years, these noble families feuded, oftentimes violently, over their power within a council of advisors that always served the presiding Grand Prince. Ivan IV finally ascended the throne in 1547, taking the title Tsar instead of Grand Prince, which foreshadowed his intent to control the state himself as an emperor. As what was possibly a result of his childhood surroundings at the Muscovite court, Ivan IV sought to consolidate his power at the expense of the nobility. His efforts in centralization allowed him to carry out his expansionist ambitions as a unified nation, such as our strong union of socialist republics, can both more easily face outside adversaries and annex new territory. With the reign of the first 2 Romanov Tsars, named for the family name of Mikhail Romanov, came expansion into Siberia. Mikhail Romanov, being the first, reigned from 1613 to 1645. The Tsar made clever use of the Cossacks who had once dared to claim the throne in the years prior to his reign. They were to spread across the great wilderness, founding outposts and forts, in order to collect tribute from natives. Like the Mongols before the Russians, these peoples who lived in Siberia had paid tribute. The difference is that now they were to offer furs. This commodity had been increasing in value as the populations of the European beaver farther west had begun to decline due to excess hunting. In addition to furs, Siberia was an excellent place to obtain lumber. As the forests of mainland Europe also began to recede, much like Lenin's hairline, our nation's premium exported lumber would gain importance. By 1649, brave Russians had reached the Pacific coast, securing a large amount of untapped natural resources for their nation. One of the ways in which Tsar Peter expanded the empire was westernization. He attempted to change the ways of the government, military, and society by learning from technologies and policies that Western European nations used. We now know, of course, that these ideas were inane in comparison to our glorious Communist Party's regime. The Great Embassy, consisting of 3 ambassadors and 250 other individuals, was assembled in 1697. It set out, often with Peter in disguise as a sailor or carpenter, to observe the ways of the West. He even assisted in construction. They inspected military installations, shipyards, and met with leaders to gather support against the Swedish Ottomans. Upon his return in 1698, Peter began to implement reform based on what was learned. One odd change, for example, was his new law on beards, then a historic remnant of old Russia. He demanded that the boyars be clean-shaven or pay a tax on their facial hair. Our nation's hero, Lenin, would certainly not approve. More practical, however, were his changes to the government. He grew the central government's power by introducing its elements on the local level. Furthermore, he replaces the army, then consisting of noblemen and professional soldiers, with peasant conscripts that would be trained as soldiers. In addition, he finally creates a navy for our glorious country. Economic reform included the creation of factories for production of items needed by the military. Private ventures were encouraged as well in order to stimulate trade. The Tsar also improved education through the founding of secular schools across the empire with books that originated in the West. For specialist workers, the government would send men west to learn the necessary skills. Finally, the Tsar implements a network of spies in order to eradicate corruption. Peter the Great's first military campaign was the seizure of Azov in the Black Sea from the Ottoman Empire and their vassal state, the Khanate of Crimea. This conflict, lasting from 1695 to 1696, shows a clear continuity of the wish for access to water by Russian leaders, and therefore waterborne trade. Initially, the Tsar failed to capture the city. Despite this, like a true Russian, Peter does not quit. He instead calls for the construction of a small flotilla of ships further inland along the Don River, which runs past Azov. After personally assisting in their construction as a carpenter, the fleet had 29 plus ships, all of which sailed down the river to bombard the port. The Ottomans would only come to regain Azov as a result of yet another conflict between Sweden and Russia. Like Ivan IV before him, Peter fails to retain a major amount of land in the Baltic. While the Swedish military falls entirely at the hands of a hardy Russian army, the Turks are successful in an invasion of the south. Our incessant Politburo would have never considered surrender. However, Peter the Great willingly gave up Azov. It was fortunate, though, that he did not have to give up any land to the Swedes. As a result of the lands that were maintained against Sweden in the north, Peter the Great was able to expand Russia in a non-territorial manner. Perhaps his most impressive feat of construction was St. Petersburg. Similarly to Novgorod, it was positioned strategically with access to the Baltic, Black, and Caspian seas via rivers for trade. While territorial expansion to the west was once again denied, the Tsar was successful in economic expansion and political progress through partial westernization. Towards the end of the 18th century, after nearly 70 years of empresses being in control of the motherland, Catherine the Great ascends to the throne. Like Tsar Peter, Catherine makes attempts at reform, including improvements in education for girls and the founding of Hermitage as an art museum in St. Petersburg. The Empress even makes an admirable attempt at liberating the serfs in 1767. However, without the support of the nobility, whom drew their wealth from this feudal system, the common people of Russia would not be truly liberated until the advent of our most supreme Red Revolution. It is unfortunately true that most people became serfs during Catherine's reign, as she gave crown lands where peasants were free to the nobility, who greedily forced the Russian people into becoming serfs. With limited access and internal improvement, Catherine, like Peter, turned towards territorial expansion. She places her attention on the Black Sea, where her ancestor had succeeded temporarily with Azov. This time, instead of war, Catherine makes shrewd use of diplomacy. When the Khanate of Crimea finally gains independence in 1774, the Empress annexes it, as a truce with the Ottomans prevented intervention. The Turks strike back with war in 1787. However, our strong Russian troops prevailed over the Anatolian forces, leaving our nation with the northern coast of the Black Sea. The empire had once again expanded successfully, as was characteristic of that time period. So, comrades, our journey through our nation's past comes to a close. Surely now you can understand our past leaders' admiration for the West and our current, more informed hatred of their capitalist ways. There was much change in this 300 years. Our nation transformed from the old Muscovite princedom's unorganized army to the conscripts of Tsar Peter. Education of our children and young adults spread in order to create specialized workers, though not as passionate as the men and women of our own society. We expanded our lands in search of better trade relations and in attempts to improve our economy. Little did they know that the true path to prosperity lies in government 5-year plans which dictate our usage of resources. On behalf of the party, comrades, I hope you have learned something here today. This is Dmitry Valentinovich Epifanov, signing off. And most definitely not being taken to a KGB black site.